There were numerous apocalypses written in the ancient world, even though today people are by and large familiar with only one of them, the Apocalypse of John, also known as the Book of Revelation. It's long been a favorite of Christian fundamentalists, who have seen it as a blueprint of what's happening in our own time and as a prediction of what is to happen in our near future. In very early times, as far back as we have records from the ancient Israelites, there was a worldview that modern scholars have described as a covenantal worldview, which claimed that the God who created this world was especially the God of Israel. Having been enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years, Israel was desperate for salvation, and God raised up for them a Savior, Moses, through whom he brought deliverance to the people by delivering them from their slavery in Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and then coming into the Promised Land under Moses' successor Joshua. How does one explain the fact that Israel is conquered by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by the Persians, by the Greeks, constantly being overrun by other world powers, if God in fact is in control? And so at one point in Israel's past, long before many of the books of the Bible were actually written, as far back at least as the 8th century BC, there developed a different worldview. A worldview that we could call the prophetic. This is the view that you find throughout the prophets of the Old Testament. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, all of the prophets hold this particular worldview as to why Israel suffers. Now, according to a prophetic worldview, somebody suffers because God's doing it to them. Apocalypticists didn't think that people were suffering because of punishment, however. They're suffering because there are evil forces in the world that are alienated from God and are trying to punish those who side with God. So that in the apocalyptic worldview, it's the people who side with God who suffer in this world. Jewish thinkers started thinking about the existence of a personal adversary of God, the devil, Satan. The author of the book of Revelation was also an apocalypticist. People today aren't used to reading this genre of literature, so when they read the book of Revelation, it sounds completely unlike anything they've ever read before. Well, it's simply because they haven't read ancient literature enough. If you read enough ancient literature, you run across apocalypses written both by Jews and by Christians, and you realize it was a form of writing. The very strange imagery of the book of Revelation is not unusual in apocalypses. Most apocalypses contain visions that reveal very bizarre imagery. These visions are normally explained by some heavenly being to the prophet, typically have a triumphalist ending, showing that God will ultimately prevail. Their function, as a rule, is to encourage believers to hold on and to keep the faith, because their present sufferings will soon be vindicated. Now, it's an interesting irony. The book of Revelation claims to be written by somebody named John, whereas the book of John, the Gospel of John, does not claim to be written by somebody named John. Most apocalypses in the ancient world were pseudonymous, meaning they were written under a false name. Usually, a person would write in the name of a famous religious person in the past. And so we have apocalypses written by Abraham, allegedly, and Enoch. We even have an apocalypse allegedly written by Adam, of Adam and Eve fame. Some early Christian scholars pointed out that the writing style of Revelation is quite different from the writing style of the Gospel of John, so it could not be by the same author. That opinion continues to be held by scholars today. Whoever wrote the Gospel of John did not write the book of Revelation. That's absolutely clear once you read these books in Greek, because they have a different writing style. When the book of Revelation is read as an ancient apocalypse, in other words, when it's put in its own historical literary context, then its message makes considerable sense. The way the basic plot of the book of Revelation works is this. There's a prophet named John who's been exiled onto the island of Patmos, who is given a vision. In this vision, he sees one like a son of man, who is a representative of Jesus himself, who tells him that he's going to reveal to him the nature of heavenly reality so that he can understand what's happening on earth. He sees a window in the heaven, and then he shoots up through this window and he enters into the heavenly places, and he sees the throne of God with God on the throne. Beside the throne is a lamb as if slain. On the throne, the one sitting on the throne is holding a scroll that is sealed with 7 seals. These seals have to be broken before the scroll can be opened. The scroll records the future of the earth. But no one is worthy to break the scrolls. No one is of sufficient dignity to break the scrolls except for the Lamb. The Lamb takes the scroll and starts breaking the seals. And as he breaks each seal on the scroll, a disaster hits the earth. War, disease, famine, destruction. With the breaking of every seal, a new calamity hits. When he breaks the 7th seal, though, instead of another calamity, what happens is we're introduced to 7 angels who have 7 trumpets. And they blow their trumpets one at a time. And as they blow their trumpet, each one blows the trumpet, another disaster hits the earth. When the 7th trumpet is blown, however, instead of another disaster, we're introduced to 7 angels who have 7 huge bowls of God's wrath. And they pour out God's wrath out upon the earth one at a time. 7 seals followed by 7 trumpets followed by 7 bowls of God's wrath. But then at the end, God intervenes himself. And God sends Christ from heaven. Christ on a white horse to do battle with the Antichrist, his opponent on earth. Christ wins the battle gloriously, and then we have the beginning of a millennial age, a utopian world of 1,000 years in which righteousness reigns on the earth, after which there's a resurrection of the dead, and God then creates a new heavens as God rules the earth in his righteousness so that the righteous followers of God are given an eternal reward. Let me give you an example of how this works, of how the symbolism works, by actually giving 2 examples to show that this book is best understood as, in fact, referring to events transpiring in the prophet's own day. The first passage that I want to look at has to do with the famous whore of Babylon from chapter 17. One of the 7 angels who had one of the 7 bowls of God's wrath appears to the prophet John, and he says, chapter 17, verse 1, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." Okay, so there's a whore, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with this whore. And so he's taken out into the wilderness in the spirit, and he sees a woman, the prophet sees a woman seated on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and this beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman is clothed in purple and scarlet. She's adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, and she holds in her hand a cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. This is a very strange vision. On her head is written a name, a mystery. The name is Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Well, the angel indicates who this whore is, and anybody who understands about the first century knows quite clearly who this whore represents. The angel says, this calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads of the beast on which the whore is seated are 7 mountains. 7 mountains. The 10 horns are 10 kings that have not yet received a kingdom, but are to receive a kingdom as authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. They're united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. He goes on to explain then at the end who the woman is. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. The whore of Babylon represents a city seated on 7 hills. What is the city built on 7 hills? Well, as any student of antiquity knows, that's the city of Rome. Rome, the city built on 7 hills. Rome, the city that had conquered the world. Rome, the city to whom the kings of the earth were subservient. Rome, the city that had persecuted the Christians. This is a vision not of our own future, it's a vision of Rome in the time of the prophet, who's understood to be a whore that has committed abominations with the other nations of the earth and has persecuted the Christians. A whore that is going to be dethroned from her seat, who's going to be destroyed when God intervenes for his name and sets up his good kingdom on earth. Give you a second example of how this book is referring to events of its own day. Revelation chapter 13 is the famous passage of the rise of the Antichrist, who is a beast that rises out of the sea with 7 heads, 10 horns and 7 heads. Well, that sounds familiar. That's where you're going to get that 17. So you think, well, this beast is Rome again. In fact, this beast is called the Antichrist. It blasphemes against God, and it makes war on the saints and conquers them. But then we're told an interesting passage, the number of the beast. Let anyone understand who can read. The number of the beast is the number of a person. Its number is 666. 666, the number of the beast. What is this referring to? Well, people have written all sorts of books trying to argue who 666 refers to. When I was in college, there was a book written to try to show that the Pope was 666. And another book was written to try to show that Henry Kissinger was 666. All sorts of theories. Well, let me tell you the theory that most biblical scholars hold to. The emperor of Rome who first persecuted the Christians was the Emperor Nero. When you spell the name Caesar Nero in Hebrew letters, each Hebrew letter has a numerical equivalent. Aleph equals 1, Bet equals 2, etc. When you add up the letters of the name Caesar Nero, it adds up to 660. It's interesting that in some manuscripts of the book of Revelation, instead of saying the number of the beast is 666, some manuscripts say the number of the beast is 616. You can spell Caesar Nero's name 2 ways. One way with a final noon on the end of Nero, one without. Without the final noon, the name Nero adds up to 616. This author is not talking about somebody in our own future. He's talking about Rome and its emperors. The Antichrist, the opponent of Christ, was the Emperor Nero. Truly I tell you, says Jesus, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. Mark chapter 13, verse 30. We've also already seen a hint of this in the writings of the Apostle Paul, who, like Jesus before him, was an apocalypticist, who thought that the end was coming soon, who thought that Jesus would soon return. The point of this book of Revelation is that people that were reading it, its audience, were experiencing hardship and persecution. And this book is telling them that they need to hold on a little while longer because God is soon going to intervene in history to overthrow the forces of evil as represented by the Roman Empire and bring his good eternal kingdom to earth. In sum, the book of Revelation was a book for its own time, and it should not be ripped out of its own historical context and made to speak about something that its author did not have in mind at all, our own future here at the beginning of the 21st century. One of the most important discoveries of modern scholarship, in fact, wasn't a discovery in the sands of Egypt of some ancient text. It was a discovery actually made in the libraries of Europe. It's a discovery that early Christianity was, in fact, remarkably diverse in its beliefs.